South Africa will be hosting a National Water and Sanitation Summit in March, which is aimed at giving an update on the interventions that will be implemented to address some of the challenges which you're seeing in that package. The event is themed, South Africa is a water scarce country. For more on the state of our water infrastructure, sanitation infrastructure in the country, and answering the question, do we have equitable access to clean water for all? We're joined by OUTA Water and Environment Manager, Dr. Ferrial Adam, University of the Free State Center for Environmental Management Professor Dr. Anthony Turton, and water expert Mike Muller. We did invite the Department of Water and Sanitation to be a part of the conversation tonight, but no one was made available for this conversation. Meanwhile, you can be a part of it on 072-110-5584. Otherwise, you can tweet us at Newzroom405. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. Dr. Ferrial, let me begin with you with that particular question. Is there transparency when it comes to the state of our water resources in the country?
Not as much as we'd like. So I'd like to say no to that. I think that previously we had very good reporting mechanisms. We had the green drop and blue drop that was public information. And right now, because there's such, there's so much of a lot of the intro discussed some of the problems we're having, but it's not even just in one province. It's across the country. And because of that, the reporting is less. And so there's definitely a lack of transparency. There's also sometimes just a lack of understanding the situation so that they need to report on it. So there's a combination of issues.
Now, you talk of the blue drop and the green drop report, which was instituted back in 2009. One is the blue drop, which looks at the water quality. The green drop looks at the waste water treatments in the country. What has happened to that reporting system?
So I think, look, government still does take tests, and they still do tests on they have their points that they have to do these testing, but we're not getting the reports as we did previously. They do have an online portal called IRIS, where a lot of the measurements can be put onto that. But the reliability of that information and that data is where we are questioning some of those things. So, for example, if we looked at the fact that at least a quarter of our wastewater treatment plants are in a critical state, you can imagine then that the reports from the green drop is not going to be fantastic. It's not going to be that good. And I think government's aware of that. I think that if we look at government-owned reports, that the National Water Strategy, there have been a whole range of documents that have come out from there. There is awareness that our water is in a dire state. It is stated in there, but I don't think that they're acting in the way that we would like them to act when our water is in the state that it is right now.
Dr. Anthony, are we building a water-secure future? By that I mean, are we, where we are right now, recognizing the limitations of our water availability?
Yes, good evening to you and the listeners. So, look, I think that there's a lot of water sector professionals that are quite highly competent people. They're out there in one way or another, and they're all kind of working together, maybe not as closely as they should. But I do get a sense that there is something happening at the Department of Water and Sanitation now. They've recently appointed a new Director General. Up until now, there's been just a temporary appointment. And I think that's a very, very important step in the right direction, because it's my understanding that he's going to start consolidating now and start mapping a future. Certainly all of the planning that's coming out now, the noises that are being made, they are all the right ones. And I think that we are getting light at the end of the tunnel. The question ultimately is, how do we roll this out, and how do we, more importantly, how do we finance this all? Because the cost of the water sector rollout is going to be quite substantial. The sum of approximately 1 trillion rand is bandied around. And how that is going to be funded at the moment is a big issue. And I would also like to just add one issue, building on Dr. Adam there. I think we have to acknowledge that contemporary South Africa, as we are today, operates under a very, very deep trust deficit. So this trust deficit is something that we must all be cognizant of, something that we must all work towards overcoming. But it's certainly incumbent upon government to start really digging deep to try and overcome that, because the public in general are highly mistrustful. And I think that commentators like ourselves on the show here tonight, our role is to try and, so I think my interpretation of the role is that we ought to start trying to build that trust deficit. I don't speak on behalf of my other colleagues here, but I think it's important that we start herding all of these cats in the right direction. And there's certainly all of the big plans that are coming out. The National Infrastructure Plan that's coming out, for example, makes very, very good recommendations for the future of water, including desalination, including wastewater recovery, including all of the right things are being spoken about. And it's a question of ultimately how do we implement it, and then how do we fund it? That's the big question.
Yeah. Mike, the National Water and Sanitation Master Plan 2018, Volume 1, if you look at it, it speaks of an enabling environment, and it speaks of creating effective institutions. Are we on the way towards that? Is the environment awoke to the fact that we are a country currently that has wastewater treatment systems that are only, 56% functional? 44% are in poor or critical condition, and 11% are dysfunctional at the moment.
Tabo, no, he's asking me, Anthony. Tabo, thanks and good evening. I'm worried by this discussion because if you go around and listen to that lady from Ottersdal, people are worried about, do they have water in the taps? Does the toilet, when it flushes, if they've got a flush toilet, does the waste run away? I was in a small Free State town this afternoon on the N1, and I can tell you all the sewers were blocked. And, that isn't going to be solved by a national strategy. Those are the kind of issues that we need to tackle bit by bit, starting from the ground up. And I think if we listen to what Minister Mkunus was saying in the Northwest, he was saying it's very important for communities to get together and work together, find out what their problems are, find out what the blockages are, and begin to deal with them. That, I think, is where we need to start. All the big talk about big national plans and strategies and this intervention and that really doesn't make water come out of the tap. And I can give you a whole range of examples of that. And I think if we want to be helpful, and I agree that we need to be helpful, we ought to be saying, what kind of problems do people have? How could they address them? I mean, I was also recently in a little town in a hotel, and the owner was complaining to me, we haven't had water for the last 6 months. And I said, but why? You're standing on the side of a dam. You've got a water treatment works. He says, but the municipality hasn't paid the water board, and the water board can't now pay the electricity bill, and therefore we don't have water. We would pay the electricity bill directly, but we're not allowed to. Now, you see, those are the kind of silly problems that aren't solved by big national strategies, but are solved by creating, and maybe this is your point, an enabling environment where people can get together and say, we understand the reason we don't have water is because this bill hasn't been paid. Yeah. We're prepared to pay it. And if we look at what happened in Lekwa, in Standerton, where Astral Foods really pushed the buttons, they got that done. What we don't want to see is people just saying, we can't work here, we're just going to go away, leave it, let them collapse. Yeah. And I'm afraid we've got these two views, either let it collapse or let's work together. But start on the bottom, work together, and I think we'll find that many of these problems can be solved. But we can come to that. I'd be very curious to hear what your viewers have to say. Absolutely.
We'll come to that in a moment. What are the stumbling blocks from equitable access to water and sanitation services? We'll unpack that further when we continue with our panel, Dr. Ferrial Adam, Dr. Anthony Turton, Mike Muller, and you, of course, on 072-110-5584. We continue next on In Focus. Welcome back. You're live with us tonight here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. It is predicted that demand for water in the country will far outstrip supply by 2030 if we continue on the trajectory that we are currently on. What is holding us back from delivering reliable water and sanitation services to all? Dr. Ferrial Adam helping us in that conversation, Dr. Anthony Turton, as well as Mike Muller. Before the break, Dr. Anthony, you raised the issue of capacity. It's previously been pointed out that, one, there is a shortage of technical skills at local government, but two, there are poor infrastructure management practices and inadequate budgeting and spending on maintenance, particularly at municipal level, which is what Mike is also raising, where water is actually supposed to get into the pipes, into the taps, into households. You're confident that something is happening there? What actually is happening there, Dr. Anthony, that should give us hope?
Yes, I do believe that there are things happening there, and I'm cautiously optimistic about it. Just one of the many things that are happening, and there are quite a few things that are happening, but just one of them now is a move through the courts to actually start enabling people to pay money directly for the services received. This is currently in the courts, and I think it's a very, very important decision. So I don't know which way the courts will decide on that matter. But let's assume that they decide that this is technically possible, because it is technically possible. But let's assume that they decide that it is legal. Then I think that's going to immediately start bypassing one of these very, very important bottlenecks. And we are also seeing outreach from a number of municipalities. I've engaged in my own local municipality. I live in the Port Shepstone area, and the Port Shepstone municipality, they are right now talking about also engaging broader family of technical expertise. And certainly I've been part of a process over the last couple of months where they are planning quite a substantial infrastructure upgrade, and they really have been listening to input from a range of people. So I get the sense that there is a new sort of air of urgency out there. Whether it's whether it's short-lived or not, I don't know, but I'm essentially an optimistic person. But what I would like to say is that I think we're living in a very, very important period of time now, because I would like to suggest that we're living between two brackets at the moment. And the first bracket, when we opened up this bracket, was the municipal election last year. And then the next, we're going to close the bracket at the national election. I think between now and 2024, we're going to start seeing a lot of these things coming to the fore. And there has been a lot of work that's been done in the background. I'm part of the public-private growth initiative. There's a business water chamber, and there's a huge amount of work that's been done through that body, linking up with the Department of Water and Sanitation, linking up with the National Planning Commission, linking up with the Development Bank, all sorts of stakeholders, to start putting together all of the very same instruments that Professor Muller is talking about now. Yeah. Now we have to start dropping those instruments down at local levels, because those instruments need to hit the ground running. And ultimately, it comes down to really a couple of important things. We have to rebuild skills and capacity at local level. That's very important. Number two, we've got to ring fence the financing that is needed to pay for the infrastructure. And number three, we've got to be able to improve the billing so that people can pay for the services that they receive, and that money is not pilfered. And these are fairly elementary things, but they have to be done. And through the process of the courts at the moment, particularly through a thing called a special purpose vehicle, this is entirely technically possible. And I think you're going to start seeing it happening not only in water, but also in the energy sector in the very, very near future.
Dr. Adam, do you share a similar optimism around the work that is being done currently? For example, on the capacity issue, right? I think it was in 2018, I could be wrong, when we contracted some Cuban engineers to assist us, because we said we did not have the necessary technical skills in the country. One of the criticism was that that we were not building local capacity. 2 or 4, 3 years later, are we at a better place now, having contracted those engineers?
In my view, no, I don't think we are. I mean, I don't think that was going to be the silver bullet we needed to fix our water. But I do think that, there are skills within our country. The challenge, though, is, and a lot of people have left the local government because of the frustrations that they've had to experience within that environment. So, I mean, I am optimistic that we can move forward together. And I agree with Professor Muller, and, in terms of what he was saying, that people are concerned about water in their taps. And I think the reason,
Oh, dear. So, sorry, Dr. Adam, unfortunately, that line is breaking up very badly there. We're not making out what you're saying. So we'll try and get you on a better connection there so that we can at least... Oh, maybe you can try again. Let me hear if I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay, go for it.
Okay. So basically, I think that what is being said is true, but I do think we have the skills. The challenge is to change the corruption, and we have to tackle those things head on. And what we saw in local government elections is that voters are now voting according to the service delivery that they're experiencing. And that is the powerful thing for me, that people on the ground are making their voices heard. And that is why politicians are now actually doing something and running off their feet. And I agree that we all need to deal with this together. I think that, Dr. Turton has mentioned a few things that are happening on the ground to make things better. But I think there's one element I want to add, and that is for the number of citizen science and civil society groups on the ground that need to work together with government. They have solutions. They have the potential to actually change the way things are happening. A case in point is the floods that have been experienced in Tshwane yesterday. You've mentioned it, Henops Riverside. Some of the first people who were responding were from groups that clean the river, that monitor the river. And that's where I think we need to build that. We need to build our relationships with civil society organizations on the ground. It's not that they always want to attack, they also want to build and fix, and that's where we as OUTA come in.
Yeah. One of the areas, Prof. Muller, that we spoke about earlier on is that enabling environment, and I'll go back to it because Dr. Turton raises the issue of the courts and the amending of legislation to allow for people to pay direct for the services. So currently, not my numbers, this is the numbers of government, National Water and Sanitation Master Plan. They're saying 41% of municipal water does not generate revenue. How is the situation of changing the law so that people are able to pay directly going to affect that aspect of things?
Yeah, Thabo, the first thing we need to say is we do actually have technical capacity in the country. I'm a member of a number of the professional associations, the Academy of Engineering, the Institute of Civil Engineers, Water Institute of Southern Africa. We're all very frustrated watching our young professional colleagues trying to get a foothold in the business and being terribly frustrated. There's work to be done, there's skills to do it, but somehow we don't put the work and the skills together. Now, in terms of the enabling environment, you see, I'm a little worried about court cases. I know OUTA's fond of them, but, the trouble is you get a judgment and it says government must do the following. And if government turns around and they can actually cite the Constitution and say, well, yes, we really do understand we'd like to do it, but where does the money come from and who does the work? You can't just parachute a few people in for a couple of months into a municipality and fix things. You actually have to put up a new structure, new people. You've got to give them the authority, you've got to give them the budget, and they've got to be able to work with the community where they are. And that doesn't happen overnight. Now, the minister has been talking about what to do with these water boards, because what's been happening with the water boards, they provide a bulk service, municipalities don't pay. Like Sedibeng, the water board goes broke. Now, where does the water come from? But more important, what could have happened instead? Could Sedibeng have the water board have taken over those operations? Would that have helped? And that might be one option. The danger of this idea that, we'll get the courts to just rule that people can pay directly is there are a lot of people, more than half of all South African households don't pay for water. Now, are the courts going to give authority to OUTA's constituency to now take over the water supply? But are they going to impose that condition? You have to make sure that everyone gets a basic water supply, even if 50 or 60% of them don't pay for it. Those are rather big questions, which I don't think we've really got to. What are we going to do if the municipalities aren't functioning? How are we going to make these services work? how are we going to run them and sustain them? Because really the problem isn't skills, nor is it infrastructure. The problem is about managing and the discipline of managing. And I have to say, and we can maybe come back to this, the users also need to be a little disciplined. They can't have just as much as they want. No one can have just as much as they want. We've got to take what we need and contribute as far as we can. And that discussion isn't happening loudly enough. And I think without it,
I want us to have that discussion. I want us to have that conversation, the balance of requirement and supply in just a moment and what needs to be done. But Dr. Adam, I see you want to jump in. Go for it. Dr. Ferrial, you can come in.
Yes. I think because, the thing about the court cases is that we need to be clear that OUTA does not just run to the court just because that is our only recourse. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I want to say we go to the court. That's our last resort. We want to find other solutions. And if we cannot find those solutions, then we will go to court. But I think we are saying that there are so many groups on the ground, citizen organizations, civil society, that can work with government to fix some of these things. And what we're saying is we need to create a network of groups that are out there already that can assist with data and information that they have and create a kind of a picture of what's going on in South Africa. And I think that is what we're starting with. We're not saying that we're going to go straight to court on that. But I must add that when you're in a community and you have not had water for 5 years properly in from your tap, then I think the Constitution does give you the right to go to court. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, that is the only time our government is listening to us, is when we go to court, because then they have to actually sit up and listen to what we have to say. And I do agree that South Africans, we have to use water more sparingly. We have one of the highest per capita water usage, about 235 liters per South African. But even within that, the inequality is vast. I mean, you've got areas and communities that don't have water, and then you've also got areas that have like 2 swimming pools and a lot of water that is being wasted. So we have to also, as a society, become more mindful of the little water that we do have in our country.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take this further to balance requirement and supply. It's been said that we need to reduce water demand and increase the supply. How do we do that? When we continue next. Let's hear your views as well tonight. 072-110-5584. You can tweet us at Newzroom 405. With you tonight, Dr. Ferrial Adam, Dr. Anthony Turton, Prof. Mike Muller with us tonight. Dr. Anthony, how do we avoid that situation? People shooting each other for access to water. I mean, the question here is, when we speak of, for example, in the numbers, 64% of households in South Africa had access to water supply services. Do we take into consideration and account for those families who spend long periods of time actually with water interruptions, ending up having to fight for it? And maybe we should readjust that number, not to say 64% of people actually have access to water, because then we sit back and do nothing.
Yes, look, these things are enormously complex, and I live in that area. I live in the OUTA district area. Tomorrow I'm actually addressing a local community on this very same issue. So I'm up to my eyeballs in this particular matter. I'm not sure that those shots were fired because of that particular issue. That's mixed up with a whole lot of other things. But remember, there was that very intense looting here in July last year, and shop owners are exceedingly fearful now of going down the same route again. So people have got guns, they get trigger happy, and all kinds of unpleasant things are happening. Let me just go back. Can I please just challenge one thing that you said earlier on, which I think we need to correct? We don't need to change the law. The law is adequate as it is. We really don't need to do that. And when we talk about going to court, I just need to be precise about that. I'm not an advocate. I'm not a person that wants to always go to court. But what I am saying is that the current raft of litigation is coming to, there's like a common theme through that. And one of the themes in that now is can we empower, let's call it third-party entities to collect cash on behalf of the municipalities that are unable to do that for services rendered. And this is not inconsistent with the current government strategy, where they're talking about moving towards independent service providers over time. This is happening in the Eskom space as well. It will start happening in the water space as well. Now, we're not quite there yet. This is a trend. It's a vector. We're moving in that direction. So ultimately, these are all local initiatives that are coming together to solve their own problems. Yeah. I must put my hand up and say that I'm one of those people that also lives under profound water insecurity. I also cannot guarantee that I can brush my teeth tomorrow morning or have a shower once a day, because I live in that same area and the water supply is broken down. The little community that I'm in, we've made some plans, the best plans we can. We can survive if there's a total breakdown of water supply. We can survive for 48 hours, and we're busy increasing that capacity now to be able to survive for a week. Yeah. But sometimes we don't have any water supply for days on end, but it could be weeks on end. So it really is a dire situation, and the local economy has collapsed. But what I would like to say is that the OUTA municipality is apparently making an effort to reach out to various communities, and that we really are trying to work together to this common cause. But I get back to what I said earlier on. There is a deep and profound trust deficit, deep and profound. Remember, this area was taken over by militia in the July uprising. Armed militias were riding around here with heavy caliber weapons on the back of bakkies. Okay, so let's not forget that little matter. This is not an insignificant matter. So we have to understand that it's a very tense local situation, and we've got to sort of calm that little thing down. Let's focus our minds on this. Let's not get overly excited about it. But the bottom line is this: we have to revitalize the local economy, and part of that is water and energy. Water is the economic enabler, and we've got to ultimately make this thing sustainable, in an inclusive growth economy. This is really what it's all about.
Let's stick to that a little bit on sustainability. Address for me the question of the real value of water. There are some who are saying, in fact, it is in the National Water and Sanitation Master Plan that water is severely underpriced, and cost recovery is just not achieved, and therefore not sustainable going forward.
You want me to take that for you?
Yes, please. Okay.
Yeah, I think we must be very careful about this question of the value of water. There's lots of PhD theses that have been written about it. We can look at it from about 20 different perspectives. The question at the end is, what do we need to pay to get the water where we need it? If we have to build a dam, who's going to pay that? Who's going to finance it? Because there's no community in South Africa that can just pay to put up a big dam. But if you've got 20 years in which to do it, you can raise the money. But what we aren't quite clear about is who is going to pay for what. And that's a discussion that has been lost in all of this confusion. We have a law which says there's a basic right to water. We've defined what that basic right is. But if you go and discuss with people, do they accept that limitation? I visited some people in the Giyani district, double-story house, 6 bathrooms, complaining bitterly that they don't have enough water. But when I asked were they paying, they said no, they weren't paying. They weren't getting a bill. And anyway, they were entitled to free water. And until we say, this is how much you get for free, because half the country cannot afford to pay anything for water, Thabo, really. So the value for them is the value of life or death. But there are people who take a lot of water and don't pay anything for it. And there are other people who take a lot of water, but by the way, their payment covers the cost of all the infrastructure. So I think this idea of the value of water is a confusing one. Really, we ought to ask the question, going back to my tap and why is the water not coming out of it? What do I need to do? Who's going to do it? How much is it going to cost? And where are we going to get the money from? And if we haven't got enough money, who's going to save and who's going to contribute? Those are the kind of questions that we need to address at the community level. And if we don't do that, we'll have conflicts, as in Ugu, which, by the way, has been going on when I was Director General of Water 20 years ago. This conflict in Ugu were happening, and actually people were also sabotaging the water pipes because they wanted to sell water from tankers. So these conflicts happen and need to be resolved. They'll only be resolved if we talk about them and we say, how do we fix these problems? And that's again, always where I want to come back to. There is no single solution for South Africa's water problems. We have lots of different water supplies, lots of different community organizations, and they all, I'm afraid, have to work quite hard to understand what the issues are and then work together to fix them. It's a big challenge, but it's the kind of thing that South Africans can do if they start working together, and many of them are trying to do that.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll wrap the conversation tonight. Dr. Ferrial Adam, Dr. Anthony Turton, and Professor Mike Muller with us tonight. And of course, taking your views, 072-110-5584. Are we addressing that question, the real value of water? And what do you make of the views raised there by Professor Mike Muller on what needs to happen is to determine how much water supply we need, what infrastructure needs to be put in place, and who's going to pay for it. That is the approach that we should be taking at a community level. 072-110-5584. We'll take your views next. Stay with us. Welcome back. Live with us here on this conversation as we tackle the challenges of water supply. Next, we'll look at the question of demand management and alternative sources of water, certainly to be able to balance requirement and supply. Dr. Ferrial Adam, Dr. Anthony Turton, as well as Prof. Mike Muller, still with us tonight. Dr. Adam, let's bring you in. You wanted to weigh in on the question of the value of water?
I think it was more, I mean, I agree that, we don't want to commodify water and put a price to it in terms of value, but I do think that there needs to be stronger enforcement in terms of what people use and paying for the amount that they use. I do think that there needs to be some of that. And I think, for a lot of the conversation, we've been talking about people who don't have water. But let's not forget that there are large infringements by large water users who are using water without proper water use licenses. They're damming rivers where they should not be damming rivers, but we don't have enough enforcement to hold those people accountable. Or, and then when they do give them a fine, it's a slap on the wrist that it's cheaper for them to just violate the laws than actually be law-abiding citizens. And those are not the people on the ground or residential areas or communities. Those are big users like agriculture, mining, industry. And we need to hold them accountable for where they waste water and where they pollute our water. That is another really big concern we have, because if we're in a country with very little water, polluting the water doesn't make sense. So I do think that people who use a lot more water need to pay accordingly. There needs to be a proper step tariff that allows that to happen. It does exist to some extent, but I think it needs to be better enforced and it needs to be improved.
Dr. Turton, if the objective is to reduce future water demand and to increase supply, where do we begin?
Well, that's a great question. If we want to reduce, reduce demand is something that I've got a pet view on this thing. People always say that we must just, blame the end user. I don't believe in blaming the end user. I believe that water is a productive thing. You create jobs, create livelihoods. So, it's as simple as that. If a big factory needs lots of water, they must use that water, but they must use it responsibly. Water is an economic enabler. That's my viewpoint. But having said that, we ultimately have to balance out demand and supply, and there is a whole professional topic on demand-side management, and one of them is pressure reduction. And of course, we must do that responsibly. We don't just go and increase the supply without first managing demand. It's a question of balance. As Professor Muller says, it's not a silver bullet approach here. So I think in the future we're going to have to start increasing supply. This is really a no-brainer. And that increased supply, the beauty of it is that the technologies are becoming more and more sophisticated, more and more advanced. And one of the things that's happening now is your desalination technologies are now starting to become so sophisticated and so exponentially cheap that we're starting to see them come online at a par of what we currently producing water from surface water resources. You must also remember that surface water resources are increasingly being polluted. So when we talk about the cost of water, what about the cost of not having water? What about the opportunity cost, the lost when we don't have that water. So we're going to start seeing these things coming online very, very soon. In fact, there's currently a race underway in the Middle East, in the Saudi Arabian area, where they're starting to go down to 20 US cents per cubic meter of water. Yeah. 20 US cents. That's what they're currently aiming at, and this is quite significant because this is a game changer at global scale. Yeah. The other thing I'd like to just say in closing is that the ANC government has actually done quite a lot of really good work in the KZN area. They pioneered the first water recovery from waste at the Durban South Wastewater Treatment Works at Amanzimtoti. And they've also just recently pioneered a process known as the remix model, which is a Hitachi technology demonstration, where they blend water recovered from waste into seawater and thereby reduce the osmotic pressure, and thereby reduce significantly the cost of desalination. So I'm a desalination optimist. I believe that is very much the future. And in fact, we need to look no further than places like eMalahleni in Mpumalanga, where the last year's mine water you can think of is being cleaned up to potable standards in world-class technology, where you've got a very, very low discharge of brine. And in fact, just in closing, the current trend globally is towards a thing called zero liquid discharge, ZLT. And there's a whole lot of raft of technologies coming out now to take us in that direction. So this is something in the future. This is something that's the opposite end of the local participation level, because local people are not aware of these things, and they simply, it's not in their frame of reference. So this is part of the strategic planning going forward, and there are those strategic thinkers still in South Africa. And I'm actually bullish. I'm actually very optimistic that we're going to get this thing together. I really am. We still have the necessary skills that we need in the department. And the Department of Water and Sanitation is actually a very robust institution. Even though it's had its problems, it is in fact a robust institution.
Prof Muller, maybe another PhD debate question. How much investment do we need to achieve water security? The National Water and Sanitation Master Plan says at least for the next 10 years, they're going to need about 33 billion rands a year.
Thabo, I need to warn you that a lot of those numbers came from a consulting group called McKinsey and Partners, who were desperately trying to show that they could solve the world's water problems, and they were using South Africa as one of their case studies. It's quite funny in a sense, because after they did all the work, they weren't very convincing. The guy who did the work, who actually did a lot of the basic work in South Africa, left the company and went to join an environmental agency where he was very successful as a strategy consultant. And I tell that story because, it's always a good idea when you're planning. And, I come out of this from the National Planning Commission perspective, because I spent 5 years on that National Development Plan. You plan for what you have. You don't plan for what you'd like to have. You don't plan for the country you'd like to live in or the people you have to, you'd like to live with. You plan for what you've got. And I think what we can do, if we put our minds to it, is precisely to live within our means. I'm reminded of what happened to the farmers of South Africa back in the bad old apartheid days, when they were told in 1969, my friends, the party's over. There's going to be no more water for farmers. You are going to have to use the allocations you have and use them better. And the funny thing is, they didn't use very much more water, but hell, they used it more efficiently. So they're using it so efficiently, I'm sure you've heard, the American farmers are complaining that South Africa's lemon juice, for goodness sake, is so cheap and so good that they can't compete with it, even if we have to ship it all the way to America. If you know what you've got and you know what you're trying to get, you can work out the ways to do it. But you have to be realistic about where you're starting from, what you've got, and what you are trying to do. So I'm equally optimistic about what we can do. I don't believe that this water shortage that was invented by McKinsey is helpful. They actually just took the figures that South Africa projected for 2030, and they said, you're going to have to do a whole lot of investment to meet that. Well, actually, all those investments were already planned. The problem has been that those planned investments have delayed.
Right.
Now, if you don't do the things you need to do at the right time, then you are going to run into trouble. And I think that's what we're seeing in large parts of the country.
Right.
We know what's necessary, but we're not doing it in time.
We know what's necessary, we're just not doing it in time. Dr. Ferrial, let me give you the final word here. There's a question around redistribution for transformation, and Prof. Muller is talking there about farmers' access to water. Currently, only 5% of black farmers actually have access to productive water in the country. What needs to be done?
I agree with, I think that water is very distributed very unequally, and that has to change. And the only way that can change is by including people. The catchment management forums need to operate and need to listen to people on the ground, and that's not happening as much as we'd like it to. But having said that, I just have to say that I think that whether or not we believe the McKinsey report, we are living in a water scarce country. Our rainfall is much less than the rest of the world. We have high levels of quality issues. We have high levels of quantity issues. We cannot believe that our water resources must not be conserved in some way or another. And that is the one thing. The second thing is, I do agree with Professor Muller in that we need to deal with what we have now. Technology is great, but I think that we have a window of opportunity or a window period where we have to work quickly. We don't have the money for that. We need to fix the infrastructure. And that should be our starting point. So I think that, it's a complex issue. Our water is complex. But I have to agree with Professor Muller's last statement in terms of the way forward with regards to water.
I appreciate your time, all, and thank you very much for joining us in this conversation tonight. Very helpful and very enlightening there. Dr. Anthony Turton, Professor Mike Muller, and Dr. Ferrial Adam. Thank you.